guys, this is Michelle Kane with Michelle Kane Photography and Actions, and today we're going to take a look at the Botanical Blends set. And I am going to edit this picture from start to finish using just the Botanical Blends, and at the very end I'm going to throw in a matte finish from the Caramel Black and White set. Just in case you have that set and you want to throw in a matte finish to the top of your pictures that you can't seem to get with the Botanical Blends, this is a great way to do it. Now, the Botanical Blends, the premise behind them was to create tones, which is colors, and hazes that could go over the tops of your pictures, that could help to finish off your photographs, or in this case, they can really make an entire edit from start to finish. And in the Botanical Blends, I went ahead and put in some extra actions besides the tones. So you've got light and dark, so you've got illuminate and nightshade, you've got contrast and shadows, and you can paint that in or have it over the picture globally. You've got spicy, which again is going to be more contrast. There's some clarity boosts for you, so that's sharpening. And then there's a few special effects, so that's wholesome grain, pinhole blur, and buttery blur. Now, what we're going to be doing is working on this image here and trying to basically take it from this, which is a really pretty straight out of camera image provided by Hope Tolliver Photography. So thank you to Hope for providing us with this image to work on. And we're going to be going to something like this. Now, again, this is just one variation of an edit that could be done on this picture. I'm not saying that this is the perfect edit for this picture. This is just an example to show you how the actions can work together to give you this effect. So let's start at the beginning. We're going to say that we're going to play orris root, citronella, buttery blur, lavender, spicy, nightshade, and anise. And let's start. I'm going to go to my history and take it back to the beginning here. And actually, just as a side note, the very beginning was this. And these little things right here, these little white bits of the trees back here, of the shrubs, I just find those kind of distracting in a picture. And those are little things that you might want to think about in your image, just cloning those out of there before you move on with the edit. This little white thing here over in the bottom right, just distracting. So when it's all cleaned up and it looks like that, then our focus can really be on the subject and not all the stuff in the background. So a little side note there, a little cloning and a little content aware, and we've got a nice clean background to start with. Alright, so the very first thing we're going to look at is using a couple of tones, and there's a few tones in the Botanical Blends that don't so much have a haze effect to them, but have a color tone effect to them, and they also provide a little bit of contrast boost and brightening to them. And one of them would be orris root, and we're going to start with that one. And actually, let me go back. I'm actually going to delete those. I wanted to get back to my clone state. There we go. But I want to flatten this down before we start, so I apologize for that. So we've got the cloned background, clean background as my nice background here. So now again, we'll play orris root. And when this plays, there it is. There's the effect all over at the default 60%. And I want to drop this down to about 25%. I don't want to brighten it up too much. It's just we're looking for a little bit of pop in the picture there. So before and after. And now it's made her skin a little poppier, it's given a little pink tone to the background, and that's a nice place to start. Another action from the Botanical Blends tones that works really well for just popping out a picture, especially if you have a cool toned image and you need to add some warmer tones into it, is Citronella. So I'm going to hit play on Citronella, and I'm just playing these right on top of one another. And when Citronella plays at 70%, it's too much. But let me just click off orris root for you so you can see what Citronella would provide if you didn't play orris root and you wanted more of a yellow tone to your picture. Here's the before and here's the after. So we're going to do them together, and I want to take the opacity of the Citronella action down to about 15%, somewhere in there. So I've got a nice pop to the picture. So again, back to the original. And now after our 2 actions, now we're going to play Buttery Blur. And Buttery Blur is really great for a lot of different things. I really suggest that you get into the layers and play with them a little bit. Look at what happens when you adjust each individual layer in there. And it's going to play right on top of those tone actions. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and click this off and on first of all so you can kind of see the effect of what's happening. Obviously the name implies blur and that's what's happening in here, but we can go in and turn certain layers off. So on this one I want to leave the light blur and the rich blur, and I want to get rid of the boosted blur. And with the boosted blur gone, I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to close this back down and I'm going to zoom in to her face, and because it's blur I want to remove it off the eyes. I just don't like the eyes to get too soft, and they're not too bad here. So using this layer mask here on Buttery Blur, I'm going to grab a brush at about 60% opacity and I'm just going to come in here and start to paint Buttery Blur off her eyes so her eyes are nice and sharp. And if I go too far, of course, you could always change the color of your brush from black back to white. Now this is painting it in. Now I'm just zipping it over there at a low 20% opacity. So I've removed most, but not all, so that her eyes aren't this stark, really sharp, apparent thing in the picture while everything else is soft. They need to be sharp, but not like outrageously sharp. There's nothing, I think, that kills a picture worse than like crazy over-sharpened eyes. So be careful about that. Now a little trick I want to show you is I want to use more of this light blur. I may not keep this on the picture when it's all said and done, but I just want to show you that this is an option for you. So rather than trying to play Buttery Blur all over again, it'll try to intersect these layers that are already existing, and it'll make a hot mess for you. So I don't want to play it twice, but I want to go ahead and use this light blur up in this corner to make it light and airy and make it feel like this little hair light here is more intensified. So I'm going to select the light blur layer and I'm going to hold down my Option or Alt key and I'm going to drag it up above the entire action. So once it's there, you can see it made this light blur copy and it's above all of the rest of the picture. Now I'm seeing this light blur everywhere. Let's just amp up the opacity so you can really see how it would look over the whole picture. Pretty insane, but what we're going to do is put this light blur just up in this upper corner where the light naturally is located at. So at I'll just keep it high like this at like 82%, but let's invert the layer mask. Now this layer mask is white, so it reveals all of what's happening on this layer here. And I'm going to invert it, Command or Control I, or if you have your masks tab open, you can also hit invert on that. Command or Control I or invert. So now we've got this light blur covered up. Let's go ahead and paint it in with a white brush. And I'm going to get just a 20% opacity brush and begin to just barely give this a little bit of extra, a little bit of brightness here. And now this hair light is going to get a little bit more intensified. And it just, directional light in a picture makes the picture feel a little bit more dynamic and less static. So now we've got this painted in. Let's just turn this on and off. And once we turn it on and off, we can decide if it's too much. And I think it is. You don't want to go crazy, and you don't want to create light on the side of a person's face where it's not existing, and you certainly don't want to create light on the front of their face where it's unnatural and it doesn't even look like light would really be hitting there. So again, we just put it in the back of her and on the top of her head. So let's click off these blur layers here. So here's where we started with those 2 actions from the tones. Then we've got our Buttery Blur that we customized. And actually, I left my boosted blur on there. I think I actually will leave that on now that I see it. And that's the beautiful thing about editing, is as you go along, you may think you want to do something, and then you click layers on and off, and you discover, you know what, I'm going to do something different. And so in this case, I was going to leave this boosted blur out, but I think I'll leave it in now. I'm going to close down this action grouping on Buttery Blur, and we're going to turn on the light here that we just copied, and we'll keep going. So the next thing I'm going to do is play a tone to change the colors in the picture. So again, we're in these Botanical Blends, and we could play any tone here. And again, this is totally subjective. Whatever you like, whatever colorings you like to your picture, go for that. And you're just going to want to probably hit the play all button on this so that you can see what your options are, and just click through all of the actions until you find what you like. So for this one, I think I'm going to go with lavender and hit play. And once lavender plays, it gives this nice kind of lavender pinkish tone to the background. And at the default 60, it's too much for me. I'm going to drop this down to only about 26%. And if there's any place on the picture that I'd want to mask this out of, maybe her skin gets too bright, I can grab a low opacity black brush and using the layer mask on lavender, just zip it over there a couple of times to just lightly remove lavender so her skin doesn't pop too much. Okay, the next thing I want to do, and I'm just showing you this again so that you know that it's there, but not necessarily because I feel that this picture needs it. I personally like this very soft and delicate and airy. It just feels creamy and smooth. Let's go back to the beginning. Here's where we started. Here's where we're at right now. Very angelic, pretty kind of feeling. But I want to show you that you can go ahead and give it some clarity boost if you feel like it needs that. And so we're going to go into the contrast and shadows, and we're going to play spicy. And once spicy plays, we're going to have a lot more definition in the details, a lot more contrast, a lot more pop. Now, maybe you like that just for her clothing. You like her clothing to be nice and pop and sharp, and everywhere else you don't like it. Well, you could just mask it off everything else or just mask it into her clothes. In this case, I think what we're going to do is go ahead and pull this down to 0% and just slightly start to bring it up until we see what we like. So somewhere in there, but I don't like how bright her skin has gotten. Let's take the spicy on and off. Her skin's just too bright for my taste. So what we're going to do is just come in here with a black brush using the layer mask again, and I'll start to remove. I'm using about a 60% opacity brush as well. And I'm removing this off of everything but her eyes. So the contrast boost on her eyes was pretty good for me, and I'm happy to keep it on there. Alright, I think that could be a final edit. I just want to show you other possibilities of things that you could do. Let's go back to the very beginning. There's where we started. Here's where we've ended so far. And if you want to go in and give some definition to the cheeks, I often use my Heart and Soul collection and add in a little bit of rosy cheeks and lips, but just keeping it with the Botanical Blends, I want to give you an idea of how we can darken that. So I'm going to hit Nightshade, and Nightshade's going to play right on top, and you see Nightshade goes ahead and darkens everything down. Now we can use this to define her cheeks, give them a little bit more pop. We can also use it to come along and vignette the edges here. So let's click this on and off, and maybe we'll go ahead and just invert this layer mask, Command or Control I, or again invert on the masks palette. And with Nightshade, we got a black mask. I'm going to grab a white brush and about 20% opacity, and I'll just go in light on her cheeks. And this is what's great about using a mask, is I can go 20% opacity on the cheeks, and then I can come up here and go 50% opacity and brush it in even deeper and darker around the edges, and maybe even go like a 10% opacity brush and just zip it across her face once or twice, just to kind of just bring down the brightness just a little bit. So let's look at Nightshade before and after, just bringing in selective darkness. And the last thing, just kind of as an FYI of one of the actions that you might be saying, why is that action in there? I don't see any purpose for it. And that's anise. Now anise on its own, it really desaturates the picture. So when we have something going on like this oversaturation right here along her hairline, if that bothers you, we can play anise and we can remove it. So let's go ahead and play anise from the tones here. And again, these things I'm doing now are all things that are extra. I mean, you could have stopped this edit at any point, before. So anise all over the whole thing, of course, desaturated like I mentioned. So we're going to go ahead and invert that mask, Command or Control I, and we're just going to zoom in here. And with a brush on the black mask, I'll brush in with white brush, and we're going to add in anise. And this is just coming right along here, and it's taking down that extra saturation that's just a little too intense along the hairline there. Didn't have to be done, but if you're anal about that kind of thing, crazy skin tones and oversaturation of skin bothers you, then this is a great way that you can pull it down. And I'm just masking in and out until I find the right combination of how much to paint in and how much to leave out. Okay, so we got our arms taken care of. Her face is looking good. If you want to give it a little bit of sharpening at this point, you can go ahead and hit the shallow clarity. I'm not going to sharpen it. I kind of like it soft like this personally. And let's zoom out. And the last thing I showed you, or told you I wanted to show you, was just how to use one of the matte finishes from the caramel black and white action. Now, this doesn't have to obviously play over a black and white photograph, but it was originally built for the black and white. And I'm going to hit Matte Finish Dark. And for those of you who really love that matte look, this is one way to achieve it. So we're just going to hit the opacity and bring it down a little bit. And now everything's softened. If you want to go ahead and grab that black brush again, and maybe a 20% opacity brush, just lightly bring it off her face so it comes back into brightness and sharpness just a little bit, not crazy, but just a little bit in there. Now we've got that matte finish before and after. It just kind of brings all the contrast down and smooths it out. I personally like this one nice and colorful and without the matte finish dark, but I just wanted to let you know that that's a possibility. So let's keep that off of there. And I will go back to the beginning here. There's our starting point. We played orris root to brighten it up and give it some pop. Citronella, again, for a little bit more clarity and pop. Buttery Blur, that was masked off the eyes, so we have just the softness effect in the picture. I duplicated that light blur layer and brought it right up above the grouping here and used it to paint in just this little bit of light around here. Then lavender was the tone I selected here and brought the opacity down on that. Spicy, just to give it a little bit of punch. I kind of like it without the spicy too, to be honest. It's real pretty without it. Nightshade, even with the nightshade and no spicy, that's a really lovely effect too. Again, we put the spicy back in, spicy out. We'll put it back in, and even at this point, I'm going to drop it down just a little bit to 33%. Then the nightshade, and selectively with just different opacity brushes, painted the nightshade in. So a little on her cheeks and a little around the edges. And anise to just come in here and help remove the extra orangish reddish color that happened around the hairline and on the arm. And finally that matte finish, which I'm going to leave off in the final edit. So start to finish. An entire edit using just the Botanical Blends. Now, I personally, as a photographer, end up mixing all of my actions. That's the Heart and Soul, the Creative Heart, and the Botanical Blends. But you can create some really beautiful edits using just the Botanical Blends. So I really recommend that you first play the Play All action, which will give you all of these tones, and then you can go through and turn the eyeballs on and off. Open up the individual layers inside, such as if we look at lavender, there's different layers in here, so if you take off the golden, you get a different effect. If you take off the haze, you get a different effect. In the color, a different effect. Change the opacities. You know, play. That's the main thing. Play and find out what works for you and your style. Now today we featured the Botanical Blends. Thank you so much for watching. You can learn more about the Botanical Blends the caramel black and white, and all of my other actions at my website, michellecanephotography.com. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you have a blessed day.